always came at dawn. That's what the survivors would later tell the Texas Rangers, their voices shaking as they pointed toward the smoldering remains of what used to be the Morrison homestead. But on this particular morning in March 1839, there were no survivors to tell anything at all. Samuel Crowfeather pressed his face against the cold earth, feeling the vibrations of approaching horses through the ground before his ears caught the sound. Beside him, 3 other Comanche warriors lay motionless in the tall grass, their war paint barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness. They had been tracking this particular group of Texas settlers for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment to strike back for the massacre at Council House just months before. But something was different today, something that would change everything. "Riders coming from the south," whispered Broken Arrow, his English heavily accented but clear. "Not settlers." Moving too careful, Samuel raised his head slightly, squinting through the morning mist. A group of figures moved like shadows across the prairie, keeping low, avoiding the main trail. Even from this distance, he could see they weren't white. The way they moved, the way they stayed together, these were people running from something or someone. "Escaped slaves," said Little Wolf, the youngest of their group. "Has to be." Samuel's jaw tightened. In the complex web of frontier politics, escaped slaves represented opportunity. White settlers paid good money for their return, but they also represented something else. Fellow outcasts in a land that wanted them both dead or gone. The Morrison family was just beginning to stir in their cabin below. Smoke rose from the chimney as Mrs. Morrison started the morning fire. Her husband would be out to check the livestock soon, rifle in hand as always. Their 2 children, a boy and a girl no older than 10, would emerge to do their chores before the Texas sun grew too hot. Samuel had killed before, many times, but always in battle, always against armed men who had chosen to invade Comanche lands. This felt different. These people had never raised a weapon against his tribe. They were simply there, in the wrong place, at the wrong time, living on land that had been Comanche hunting grounds for generations. "The Dark Ones will reach the creek in 10 minutes, observed Broken Arrow. "If we move now, we can intercept them before they cross into settler territory." "And then what?" Samuel asked, though he already knew the answer was forming in his mind like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. "We talk," said Little Wolf, surprising them all. "Maybe we find common ground." The other warriors looked at him as if he'd suggested they sprout wings and fly. Comanches didn't negotiate with anyone, especially not with people connected to the white world that had brought nothing but death and disease to their people. But Samuel found himself considering it. The escaped slaves below were outnumbered, exhausted, probably hungry. They had information about settler movements, knowledge of safe houses, understanding of how the white man's world worked, and they had something else. They were being hunted just as relentlessly as the Comanches were. "The Morrison family dies today regardless," Samuel said quietly, his decision crystallizing like ice on winter water. "Question is whether we do it alone, or whether we find allies who might help us do it better." Broken Arrow's eyes widened. "You're talking about working with them, with slaves?" "I'm talking about survival," Samuel replied, checking his weapons one final time. "Our way of life is ending. The white settlers keep coming, more every month. We can die fighting them one family at a time, or we can find new ways to fight back." Below them, the escaped slaves had reached the creek. Samuel could see them more clearly now. 5 people, 3 men and 2 women, all young and strong despite their obvious exhaustion. They moved with the careful precision of people who knew that one mistake meant death or worse. "If we approach them wrong, they'll run straight to the settlers for protection," warned Little Wolf. "If we approach them right," Samuel countered, "they might realize the settlers are their enemies too." The morning sun was climbing higher, and soon the Morrison family would be fully awake and alert. This was the moment. The crossroads where everything would change. Samuel could feel it in his bones, the same way he could feel approaching storms or the presence of buffalo herds beyond the horizon. He made his choice. Broken Arrow. Circle around to the north. Cut off their escape route, but don't show yourself unless I signal. Little Wolf, stay here and keep watch on the cabin. If anyone comes out armed, you know what to do. And you? Asked Broken Arrow. Samuel stood slowly, his tall frame emerging from the grass like a spectre. I'm going to make a deal with the devil, or maybe become one myself. He began walking down the slope toward the creek, his moccasins silent on the dew-wet grass. Behind him, his warriors took their positions, trusting his judgment even as they questioned his sanity. Ahead of him, 5 escaped slaves froze like deer, sensing a predator, their eyes wide with terror as they spotted the approaching Comanche warrior. But Samuel wasn't approaching as a predator. Not exactly. He was approaching as something far more dangerous. A desperate man with a desperate plan, willing to forge an alliance that would reshape the very nature of frontier violence. The blood moon was setting, but the real bloodshed was just beginning. The first thing that struck Samuel about the escaped slaves wasn't their fear. He'd expected that. It was their discipline. Even terrified, they didn't scatter. The 3 men stepped forward, while the 2 women moved back, creating a defensive formation that spoke of military training or hard-won experience. These weren't field hands who'd simply run away on impulse. "Easy," Samuel said in English, raising his hands to show he carried no weapons in them. His tomahawk and knife remained at his belt, visible but unthreatening. "I'm not here to hurt you." The tallest of the men, a broad-shouldered giant with scars crisscrossing his dark arms, stepped forward. "Comanche warrior says he won't hurt runaway slaves. Forgive me if I don't believe that particular lie." "What's your name?" Samuel asked, ignoring the challenge in the man's voice. "Moses," came the reply after a long pause. "And before you ask, yes, like the one in the Bible. My master thought it was funny, naming a slave after someone who led people to freedom." Samuel nodded slowly. "Moses. Good name for what you're trying to do. I'm Samuel Crowfeather, and I have a proposition that might interest you." One of the women, younger than the other with intelligent eyes that missed nothing, spoke up. "What kind of proposition involves a Comanche warrior and escaped slaves? Nothing good, I'd wager." "The kind that keeps you alive past sunset," Samuel replied bluntly. "You see that cabin down there? Morrison family. They'll be awake soon, and when they see you, they'll either shoot you on sight or capture you for the bounty. Either way, you're dead or worse." Moses' jaw tightened. "And you're offering to help us out of the goodness of your heart?" "I'm offering to help you because we have common enemies," Samuel said. "The same people who want you back in chains are the ones who killed my wife and son at Council House. The same government that pays bounties for your capture is the one that's trying to drive my people off our ancestral lands." The older woman, gray-haired but strong-looking, studied Samuel with the intensity of someone who'd learned to read people's intentions to survive. "What exactly are you proposing?" Samuel glanced back toward the cabin, where smoke was now rising steadily from the chimney. Time was running short. "Information for protection. You know how the white settlements work, where they're vulnerable, when they're isolated. We know this land, how to move without being seen, how to strike without warning." "You're talking about killing innocent people," Moses said, his voice heavy with something that might have been disgust or might have been temptation. "Innocent?" Samuel's laugh was bitter. "Every settler family in this territory benefits from stolen land and slave labor. Every man, woman, and child in that cabin below would see you whipped to death without losing a moment's sleep. Where's the innocence in that?" The younger woman, Samuel guessed she might be Moses' sister or wife, stepped closer. "Say we were interested in this arrangement. What would it look like?" "Simple," Samuel replied. "You help us identify targets, isolated homesteads, families without strong defenses, places where we can strike fast and disappear. In return, we provide you with safe passage through Comanche territory, food, weapons, and protection from bounty hunters." "And after?" asked the older woman. "What happens when we've helped you kill enough white folks to satisfy your thirst for revenge?" Samuel met her gaze steadily. "Then you disappear into Mexico, or wherever escaped slaves go to be free, and we continue our war against the people who stole our children's future." A long silence fell over the group. In the distance, Samuel could hear the Morrison cabin door opening, the sound of boots on wooden steps. Mr. Morrison was beginning his morning routine, which meant they had perhaps 10 minutes before he spotted them. Moses looked at his companions, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, he turned back to Samuel. "The Morrison family. You were planning to attack them anyway, weren't you?" "Yes." "With or without our help?" "With or without." Moses nodded slowly. "Then I suppose the question is whether we watch you do it, or whether we help make sure it's done efficiently." The word hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Efficiently. Not morally, not justly, but efficiently. It was the first step down a path that would lead them all into darkness. "There's something else," said the younger woman. "We're not the only ones. There are other groups, other escaped slaves moving through this territory. Some of them might be interested in this kind of arrangement." Samuel felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. This was bigger than he'd imagined. Not just one desperate alliance, but the foundation of something larger, a network of the dispossessed, united by their hatred of the system that had crushed them. "How many others?" he asked. "Hard to say. Maybe 20, 30 people spread across different groups, all moving north, all trying to reach free territory, and all being hunted by the same bounty hunters and Texas Rangers," added Moses. Samuel extended his hand. "Then we have a deal. Your knowledge, our protection. Their blood, our revenge." Moses stared at the offered hand for a long moment. Once he shook it, there would be no going back. They would be partners in something that would either free them or damn them all. He grasped Samuel's hand firmly. "God forgive us," whispered the older woman. "God's not watching this part of Texas," Samuel replied. "That's why we have to take care of ourselves." Below them, Mr. Morrison emerged from his cabin, rifle in hand, beginning his morning patrol of the property. He had no idea that his death had just been sealed by a handshake between natural enemies who'd found common ground in their shared hatred. The pact was made. The killing would begin within the hour. Words, 1600, Chapter 3. First blood, first doubt. The Morrison cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by oak trees, positioned to provide good sight lines in all directions, the mark of a man who understood frontier dangers. But Mr. Morrison's caution hadn't accounted for enemies who knew the land better than he did, or for the possibility that those enemies might have inside knowledge of settler routines. "He checks the livestock first," whispered Ruth, the younger of the two escaped slave women, as she crouched beside Samuel behind a fallen log. "Every morning, same pattern. Chickens, then the pig pen, then the horses. Takes him about 15 minutes, and he's always alone." Samuel nodded, studying the man's movements through the morning mist. Morrison was in his 40s, weathered by frontier life but still strong. He carried his rifle with the easy familiarity of someone who'd used it before. This wouldn't be simple. "The woman and children?" Samuel asked. "Wife starts breakfast after he goes out," Moses replied from his position near the creek. "Children help with indoor chores until he comes back. They won't come outside unless something's wrong." It was strange, Samuel thought, how quickly they'd fallen into this collaboration. Less than an hour ago, these people had been strangers. Now they were planning murder together with the efficiency of a long-time war party. Broken Arrow appeared at Samuel's shoulder like a ghost. "Little Wolf has the back of the cabin covered. No one escapes that way. And if the children run?" The question came from Esther, the older slave woman, and it hung in the air like a challenge. Samuel had been avoiding thinking about the children. A boy and girl, neither older than his own son had been before the soldiers killed him at Council House. "Children grow up to be adults who hunt our people," Samuel said finally, his voice flat. Better to end it now, but even as he said it, something twisted in his stomach. This was different from battle, different from the clean violence of warrior against warrior. This was something else entirely. Morrison had reached the chicken coop and was scattering feed, his back turned to the tree line. It was the perfect moment. He was isolated, distracted, and far enough from the cabin that his family wouldn't hear the initial attack. Samuel raised his hand to signal the attack, then hesitated. "What's wrong?" Ruth whispered. "Nothing," Samuel lied, "just making sure everyone's in position." But that wasn't true. What was wrong was the memory of his son's laughter, the way the boy had played with wooden horses and dreamed of becoming a great warrior. What was wrong was the knowledge that somewhere in that cabin, other children were probably playing similar games, dreaming similar dreams. Morrison finished with the chickens and moved toward the pig pen. In a few minutes, he'd be close enough to the trees for a silent kill. Samuel's tomahawk was sharp, his aim true. It would be over quickly. "Samuel," Moses said quietly, "if we're going to do this, it has to be now." Samuel looked at the escaped slave, seeing something in the man's eyes that mirrored his own doubt. Moses didn't want to do this any more than Samuel did, but they were both trapped by the logic of their situation, by the brutal mathematics of survival on the frontier. "I know," Samuel replied. Morrison reached the pig pen and began checking the animals. He was perhaps 30 yards away now, well within range. Samuel stood slowly, tomahawk in hand, and began moving through the trees with the silent grace that had made Comanche warriors legendary. Behind him, he could hear the others following. Moses with a knife he'd taken from his former master, Ruth with a hatchet they'd stolen from a supply wagon, Esther with nothing but her bare hands and a lifetime of suppressed rage. They were 20 yards away when Morrison's pig squealed and bolted, startled by something. The farmer looked up, scanning the tree line with the instincts of a man who'd survived on the frontier by being paranoid. His eyes met Samuel's through the morning shadows. For a heartbeat, neither man moved. Morrison's rifle was leaning against the pen fence, too far away to reach quickly. Samuel's tomahawk was raised and ready. The farmer was a dead man, and they both knew it. But instead of reaching for his weapon or crying out for help, Morrison did something unexpected. He straightened up slowly, his hands visible and empty, and spoke in a calm, clear voice. "I know what you are," he said to Samuel, "and I know what they are." His eyes flicked briefly to Moses and the others. "Question is, do you know what you're about to become?" Samuel paused, tomahawk still raised. "What do you mean?" "I mean, there's a difference between warriors and murderers," Morrison replied. "Between fighting for your people and becoming the very thing you're fighting against." "Your people killed my family," Samuel said, but his voice lacked the conviction it had held moments before. "And my people enslaved theirs," Morrison nodded toward Moses. "Doesn't make what you're planning right, just makes it understandable." Moses stepped forward, knife gleaming in the morning light. Understanding doesn't stop bullets or slave catchers. "No," Morrison agreed, "but maybe there's another way." "What way?" Ruth demanded. "You going to free all the slaves out of the goodness of your heart? You going to give the Comanches their land back?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving from face to face. "No," he said finally, "I can't do any of that. But I can tell you something that might interest you more than killing my family." Samuel lowered his tomahawk slightly. "What?" "There's a slave convoy coming through tomorrow. 24 people chained in wagons, heading for the auction block in Austin. 4 guards, all armed, but they'll be camping at Miller's Creek tomorrow night." The words hit the group like a physical blow. 24 enslaved people, heading for a fate worse than death. 4 guards who definitely deserved whatever happened to them. "Why would you tell us that?" Moses asked suspiciously. Morrison's smile was grim. "Because I've seen what slavery does to people, and because I've seen what happens when good men become monsters in the name of survival." Maybe if you save those 24 people, you won't have to murder my children to feel like you've accomplished something." Samuel felt the weight of the tomahawk in his hand, felt the eyes of his companions on him, felt the terrible pull of a choice that would define not just this moment, but everything that came after. The pact had been made in hatred and desperation, but maybe it could be redeemed in something better. Or maybe Morrison was lying, buying time, hoping to turn them against each other. There was only one way to find out. Words. 1600, Chapter 4. The convoy's Shadow Miller's Creek ran cold and clear through a grove of cottonwood trees, the perfect place for travelers to rest and water their horses. It was also, Samuel realized, as he studied the terrain from a rocky outcrop half a mile away, the perfect place for an ambush. The slave convoy had arrived just as Morrison predicted. 4 guards, 24 prisoners, and 3 heavy wagons that moved slowly enough to be tracked by a child. Samuel counted the weapons he could see: rifles, pistols, whips, and leg irons that could double as clubs. The guards were confident, lazy even. They'd made this run dozens of times without incident. That was about to change. 2 guards by the fire, one checking the wagons, one relieving himself in the bushes, Moses reported as he slithered back from his scouting position. "The prisoners are chained but not gagged. If this goes wrong, they'll scream loud enough to wake the dead." "It won't go wrong," Samuel replied, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed it. This was their first real test as allies, and everything about it felt precarious. Trust built on shared hatred was fragile at best. Ruth crouched beside them, her face grim in the fading daylight. "I recognize some of those people in the wagons. That woman in the blue dress, that's Sarah from the Whitman plantation, and the big man in the second wagon, that's her husband Thomas. They've got 3 children." "Where are the children?" Esther asked, though her tone suggested she already feared the answer. "Sold separately," Ruth said quietly. "Always happens that way, breaks the spirit faster." Samuel felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. He'd seen his own people torn apart by white soldiers, families scattered to the winds, children stolen and forced into white schools to have their culture beaten out of them. But there was something particularly cruel about the systematic way slavery destroyed families, the calculated precision of it. "The guards," he said, pushing emotion aside to focus on tactics. "What do we know about them?" Moses pulled out a piece of charcoal and began sketching on a flat rock. "Leader's name is Garrett. Big man, grey beard, carries 2 pistols and a rifle. He's the one who decides when to rest, when to move, who gets fed and who doesn't. The others follow his lead. The second man is younger, maybe 25. Nervous type, keeps checking his weapons, probably new to this work. Third one's middle-aged, missing 2 fingers on his left hand, moves like an old soldier. The fourth..." Moses paused. "The fourth one's the worst. Enjoys the work too much, if you know what I mean." Samuel knew exactly what he meant. Every group of men had one, the one who found pleasure in others' pain, who used authority as an excuse for cruelty. Those were the ones who made war personal. "How do we take them?" asked Little Wolf, who had been silent since they'd arrived at the creek. "Quietly," Samuel replied. "If we can free the prisoners without alerting every bounty hunter in Texas, we might actually accomplish something useful. And if we can't?" Samuel met his young warrior's eyes. "Then we kill everyone who tries to stop us and disappear into the night. But the prisoners come first. That's the new rule." It was a strange thing to say, putting the lives of escaped slaves above the safety of Comanche warriors. 6 months ago, Samuel would have called such thinking madness. But 6 months ago, his son had still been alive, and the world had made more sense. As darkness fell, they moved into position. Samuel and Broken Arrow would take the 2 guards by the fire. Moses and Ruth would handle the one checking the wagons. Little Wolf and Esther would deal with the 4th guard when he returned from the bushes. It should have been simple. 4 against 4, with the advantage of surprise and superior knowledge of the terrain. But as Samuel crept through the cottonwood shadows, tomahawk in hand, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The guards were too relaxed, too confident. Men who transported human cargo through hostile territory should have been more alert, more paranoid. Unless it's a trap, he whispered to Broken Arrow, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. What? Morrison. He didn't tell us about this convoy to save those people. He told us to get us killed. But even as he said it, Samuel knew it was too late. Moses was already moving toward the wagons, Ruth close behind him. Little Wolf was positioning himself near the bushes. The attack was in motion, and there was no way to stop it without alerting everyone. Samuel made his choice. He burst from the shadows, tomahawk raised, aiming for the nearest guard's skull. The man looked up just in time to see death coming for him, his mouth opening in a scream that never came. The blade bit deep, and the first guard dropped like a stone. But as he fell, Samuel heard something that made his blood run cold, the distinctive click of rifle hammers being pulled back. Not from the remaining 3 guards, but from the darkness beyond the firelight. "Well, well," came a voice from the shadows. "Looks like our information was good after all." A dozen men stepped into the firelight, rifles trained on Samuel and his companions. They wore the rough clothes of bounty hunters, but they moved with military precision. This wasn't a slave convoy at all. It was bait, and they'd taken it completely. "Samuel Crow Feather," said the leader, a tall man with cold eyes and a badge pinned to his vest. "You're under arrest for the murder of the Morrison family." Samuel's mind reeled. The Morrison family was dead, but they'd left them alive, had chosen to pursue the convoy instead of... Confused, the man with the badge smiled. "Let me explain. After you left this morning, Mr. Morrison sent his boy to town with a message. Told us all about your little alliance, your plans, everything. We killed the family ourselves and made it look like an Indian raid. Now we've got you and your slave friends red-handed." The trap was perfect, Samuel realized. They'd been played from the very beginning, manipulated into exactly the position their enemies wanted them in. Morrison had never been trying to save anyone. He'd been buying time to set up their destruction. "The question now," the ranger continued, "is whether you surrender quietly or whether we have to kill you all and claim you died resisting arrest." Samuel looked around at his companions. Moses with his knife half-drawn, Ruth frozen in shock, Little Wolf reaching for his bow, Esther standing perfectly still with the patience of someone who'd survived worse situations than this. They were outnumbered 3-1, surrounded and caught completely off guard. Any rational person would surrender and hope for mercy. But Samuel Crow Feather had stopped being rational the day white soldiers murdered his family. He raised his tomahawk and smiled. "Come and take us," he said. Words. 1600, Chapter 5. Blood in the water. The first shot shattered the night silence like breaking glass. Samuel threw himself sideways as the bullet whined past his ear, rolling behind a fallen log as chaos erupted around Miller's Creek. The carefully planned ambush had become a desperate firefight in the span of a heartbeat. "Moses, the wagons!" Samuel shouted over the gunfire. If there were real prisoners in those wagons, and he was beginning to suspect there weren't, they needed to be freed before stray bullets found them. But Moses was already moving, his knife flashing as he cut down a ranger who'd gotten too close. The big man fought like someone who'd been storing up violence for years, each strike carrying the weight of every humiliation, every beating, every moment of helpless rage he'd endured in bondage. Ruth had found cover behind one of the wagons and was returning fire with a pistol she'd taken from the first guard Samuel had killed. Her shots were wild, but frequent enough to keep the rangers honest. Esther had simply vanished into the darkness like smoke, using skills learned from decades of moving unseen through hostile territory. Little Wolf and Broken Arrow fought as Comanche warriors had always fought, swift, silent, and utterly without mercy. They moved through the shadows like deadly spirits, striking from unexpected angles and disappearing before their enemies could respond. But they were still outnumbered, and the rangers had better weapons and more ammunition. "This is hopeless," Broken Arrow gasped as he dove behind Samuel's log, blood streaming from a graze on his shoulder. "We need to retreat." "No," Samuel replied, reloading his captured rifle with hands that shook from adrenaline rather than fear. "We finish this here, or we spend the rest of our short lives running from every bounty hunter in Texas." A ranger rushed their position, screaming a war cry that would have been impressive if Samuel hadn't heard real war cries from real warriors. Samuel's tomahawk took the man in the chest, dropping him into the creek, where his blood turned the clear water dark. "The wagons are empty," Moses called out from across the clearing. "No prisoners! This whole thing was a setup!" Samuel felt a cold rage settle over him like a familiar coat. They'd been played perfectly, manipulated by their own desperation and desire to do something meaningful. Morrison had read them like children, fed them exactly the story they wanted to hear, and led them straight into a trap. But the trap had one flaw. It assumed they would surrender when caught. "Ruth," Samuel shouted, "can you get to the horses?" "Maybe." "Why?" "Because we're not dying here tonight." Samuel burst from cover, tomahawk in one hand and rifle in the other, charging straight toward the largest group of rangers. It was a move so insane, so contrary to tactical sense, that it caught them completely off guard. His rifle shot took down their leader, the man with the badge who'd been so confident just moments before. The rangers scattered, some diving for cover, others trying to bring their weapons to bear on this madman who just charged into their midst. But Samuel was already moving again, using their confusion to create chaos. Moses understood immediately and followed Samuel's lead, abandoning cover to attack the rangers from a different angle. Ruth sprinted toward the horses, while Esther materialized behind two rangers and cut their throats before they knew she was there. The tide of battle shifted in seconds. What had been a carefully controlled arrest had become a bloody melee where superior numbers meant nothing and desperation counted for everything. "Fall back!" one of the surviving rangers shouted. Fall back and regroup, but there was nowhere to fall back to. Samuel and his allies had turned the ambush inside out, using the rangers' own tactics against them. The hunters had become the hunted. When the gunfire finally stopped, 7 rangers lay dead around Miller's Creek. The survivors had fled into the darkness, carrying word of what had happened back to their superiors. Samuel stood in the sudden silence, breathing hard, covered in blood that wasn't entirely his own. Around him, his companions were checking their wounds and counting their ammunition. They'd won, but the victory felt hollow. "We can't stay here," Moses said, stating the obvious. "They'll be back with more men." "I know," Samuel replied, "but first, we need to talk about what comes next." Ruth looked up from bandaging a cut on her arm. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this changes everything. They know about our alliance now. They know we're working together. Every bounty hunter, every ranger, every settler militia in Texas will be looking for us." "So we disappear," suggested Little Wolf. "Go back to the old ways, hit and run, never stay in one place long enough to be caught." Samuel shook his head. "That won't work anymore. They'll hunt us individually, pick us off one by one. Our only chance is to stay together and hit them harder than they can hit us." Esther emerged from the shadows, wiping blood from her hands. "You're talking about war." I'm talking about survival," Samuel corrected. "But yes, it amounts to the same thing." Moses was quiet for a long moment, staring at the bodies scattered around the creek. "How many more people like us are out there? Escaped slaves, displaced Indians, anyone with a reason to hate the system?" "Enough," Samuel said. "If we can find them, organize them, give them hope." "You're talking about building an army," Ruth said slowly. "I'm talking about building a family," Samuel replied. "A family of people who have nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose." The idea hung in the air between them, dangerous and seductive. They could disappear into the wilderness, try to find individual safety in isolation, or they could embrace the path they'd started down, gather others like themselves, and wage a war that would either free them or destroy them completely. "The Morrison family," Moses said suddenly. "You said the Rangers killed them and made it look like an Indian raid. That means we're going to be blamed for their deaths anyway," Samuel finished, "along with every other atrocity they want to pin on us." "So we might as well earn the reputation," Esther said grimly. Samuel looked around at his companions, bloodied, exhausted, but still standing, still fighting, still refusing to accept the fate the world had chosen for them. "There's a trading post about 20 miles north of here," he said finally. "Place called Bitter Creek. The owner sells guns to anyone with money, no questions asked. If we're going to do this, we'll need weapons." "And after that?" asked Broken Arrow. Samuel smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "After that, we start recruiting, and we show Texas what happens when you back desperate people into a corner." The Pact had been tested in blood and fire. Now it was time to see how far it could grow. Words, 1-600, Chapter 6. The Gathering Storm. Bitter Creek. Trading post squatted on the prairie like a diseased animal, its weathered walls and broken windows testament to the kind of business conducted within. Samuel crouched in the tall grass 50 yards away, studying the building through the pre-dawn darkness. Smoke rose from the chimney and lamplight flickered in the windows. Someone was awake. 3 horses tied out front, Moses whispered beside him. "Could be customers, could be trouble." "On the frontier, there's not much difference," Samuel replied. "Ruth, what do you see?" Ruth had the sharpest eyes among them, a skill developed from years of watching for overseers and slave catchers. She studied the trading post with the intensity of a hawk examining prey. 2 men inside, maybe 3. One's big, probably the owner. The others... She paused, squinting through the gloom. "The others are wearing badges." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Rangers." Either they were here on business, or word of the Millers Creek massacre had already spread. Either way, it complicated things. "We could wait," suggested Little Wolf. "Come back when they're gone." "No," Samuel said firmly. "We need weapons and supplies now, before they organize a proper hunt for us. Besides, if those Rangers are here about us, they might have information we can use." Esther materialized beside them like a ghost. She'd been scouting the perimeter, using skills learned from a lifetime of moving unseen. "Back door's unlocked. Window on the east side is broken, and there's a root cellar that might connect to the main building." "How many ways in?" Samuel asked. 4 that I can see, maybe more." Samuel nodded, formulating a plan. The trading post was isolated, which meant they could take their time. But it also meant that if things went wrong, there would be nowhere to run except into open prairie. "Moses, you and Ruth take the front. Make noise, draw their attention. Little Wolf, cover the back door. Broken Arrow, watch the horses. We might need them. Esther and I will go through the window." "And if they recognize us," Moses asked. "Then we kill them and take what we need," Samuel replied without hesitation. "This isn't a negotiation." They moved into position as the first pale light of dawn began to creep across the horizon. Samuel could hear voices from inside the trading post now, men talking in low, urgent tones. He caught fragments of conversation through the broken window. 24 dead at Miller's Creek. Never seen anything like it. Comanche and runaway slaves working together. Samuel exchanged a glance with Esther. 24 dead. That was more than twice the number they'd actually killed. Either the Rangers were exaggerating, or something else had happened after they'd left. And governor's putting a $1,000 bounty on the Comanche leader, 500 each for the slaves. Orders are to bring them back alive if possible, $1,000. Samuel had to admire the irony. He'd gone from being worth nothing in the white man's world to being worth more than most settlers would see in a lifetime. Moses and Ruth approached the front door, moving casually as if they were simply travelers seeking supplies. Moses knocked twice, then called out in his most subservient voice, "Excuse me, sir, we're looking to buy some food and ammunition." The voices inside stopped abruptly. Samuel heard the scrape of chairs, the click of weapons being readied. Through the window he could see 3 men, a fat trader behind the counter, and 2 rangers with their hands on their guns. "We're closed," the trader called back. "Come back tomorrow." "Please, sir," Ruth added, her voice pitched to sound desperate and harmless. "We've been traveling all night. We can pay good money." Samuel saw one of the rangers move toward the window where he and Esther were positioned. The man was young, nervous, probably new to ranger work. His hand shook slightly as he peered through the glass. Samuel struck like a rattlesnake, his hand shooting through the broken window to grab the ranger by the throat. The man's eyes went wide with shock and terror as Samuel dragged him halfway through the opening and drove his knife between the ranger's ribs. The ranger died without making a sound. At the same moment, Moses kicked in the front door and charged inside, Ruth close behind him. The second ranger spun toward them, drawing his pistol, but Moses was faster. The big man's knife took the ranger in the chest, driving him backward into a shelf of supplies. The trader reached for a shotgun behind the counter, but Esther was already there, having slipped through the window like smoke. Her blade opened his throat before he could touch the weapon. In less than 30 seconds, it was over. Samuel climbed through the window and surveyed the scene. 3 more bodies, 3 more reasons for the authorities to hunt them, but also weapons, ammunition, food, and information. "Search everything," he ordered. "Take anything useful." Moses was already examining the rangers' weapons. Good rifles, plenty of ammunition, and a leather satchel that probably contained official documents. Ruth had found the trader's cash box and was counting coins. Esther was gathering food and medical supplies. "Samuel," Little Wolf called from the back door, "you need to see this." Samuel followed the young warrior outside to where a 4th horse stood tied behind the building. Draped across the saddle was a body, a Comanche warrior Samuel didn't recognize, but whose death wounds told a clear story. "Torture," Little Wolf said grimly. "They kept him alive for a long time." Samuel examined the body more closely. The warrior was young, maybe 16, with the ritual scars of someone who'd recently completed his vision quest. His fingernails had been torn out, his skin marked with burn scars, his eyes gouged out. They were trying to get information, Samuel realized. About us, about our plans, about other warriors who might join us. "Did he talk?" asked Broken Arrow, who had appeared beside them. Samuel studied the boy's face, looking for signs of the particular kind of damage that came from breaking under torture. He found none. The young warrior had died without betraying his people. "No," Samuel said quietly. "He died well, but the implications were chilling. If the Rangers were capturing Comanche warriors for interrogation, it meant they were taking this alliance seriously. It meant they understood the threat it represented. "We need to move faster," Samuel said, returning to the trading post. "Gather more allies, strike harder targets, make them too busy defending themselves to hunt us effectively." Moses looked up from the ranger's satchel, his face grim. "According to these documents, they're organizing a joint operation. Rangers, army units, settler militias, even some Tonkawa scouts who hate the Comanches." "How many men?" Samuel asked. "At least 200, maybe more. And they're not just hunting us, they're planning to attack any Indian camp or slave community that might be harboring fugitives." Samuel felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. The war had already begun, whether they were ready or not. The only question now was whether they could gather enough allies to make it a fair fight. "And there's something else," Ruth said, holding up a letter she'd found in the trader's papers. "A list of names and locations, other trading posts, settlements, people who might be sympathetic to escaped slaves." Samuel took the letter and scanned it quickly. 12 names scattered across central Texas. Some were abolitionists, others were simply people who'd grown disgusted with the brutality of frontier life. All of them were potential allies or potential targets. "We split up," Samuel decided. "Cover more ground, recruit more people. Moses, you and Ruth take the northern settlements. Little Wolf and Broken Arrow head east. Esther and I will go south. And if we're captured, Moses asked. Samuel met his eyes steadily. Then we die before we talk, just like that boy outside. It was a harsh truth, but a necessary one. They were past the point where capture meant anything other than torture and death. Their only choice was to fight, recruit others to fight alongside them, and hope they could build something strong enough to survive the storm that was coming. 1 week, Samuel said. We meet back at the old Spanish mission ruins near San Antonio. Bring whoever you can convince to join us. And then, asked Ruth. Samuel smiled grimly. Then we show Texas what 8 families' worth of revenge looks like. Words 1 to 600, Chapter 7, The Price of Alliance. The Spanish mission ruins stood like broken teeth against the Texas sky, their crumbling walls testament to the failure of previous attempts to civilize this harsh land. Samuel crouched in the shadow of what had once been a bell tower, watching the approaches for signs of his companions. It had been 6 days since they'd split up at Bitter Creek, and he had no way of knowing who, if anyone, would return. Beside him, Esther checked her weapons for the 10th time in an hour. Their southern journey had been both successful and costly. They'd recruited 8 new allies, but they'd also learned just how far their enemies were willing to go to stop them. Movement from the north, Esther whispered, pointing toward a line of mesquite trees about half a mile away. Samuel squinted through the afternoon heat haze, making out the shapes of riders moving carefully through the scrub brush. Too many to be Moses and Ruth alone, which meant they'd either been successful in their recruiting or they were being followed. How many? He asked. 12, maybe 15. Moving like they know where they're going. Samuel felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. If Moses had managed to recruit that many people, it would double their numbers. But it would also mean more mouths to feed, more personalities to manage, and more chances for betrayal or capture. The riders emerged from the mesquite grove, and Samuel felt relief wash over him as he recognized Moses's massive frame leading the group. Behind him rode Ruth and 13 others, a mixture of escaped slaves, displaced Indians, and what looked like a few white settlers who'd grown disgusted with frontier brutality, but something was wrong. The group moved with the careful tension of people who'd recently been in a fight, and Samuel could see bandages on several of the riders. "Trouble," Samuel called out as Moses approached the ruins. "You could say that," Moses replied grimly, dismounting near the crumbling mission wall. "We found allies, but we also found out just how serious the Rangers are about stopping us." Ruth slid down from her horse, favoring her left arm. "They hit the Williamson settlement 2 days after we left, killed everyone, men, women, children. Made it look like an Indian raid, but we know better." Samuel's jaw tightened. The Williamson settlement had been on their list of potential sympathizers, people who might have provided safe haven for escaped slaves. Now they were dead, murdered by the very authorities who claimed to protect frontier families. "How many?" Samuel asked. 17 people, said one of the new recruits, a white man with the calloused hands of a farmer, including 5 children under the age of 10. Samuel studied the man, middle-aged, weathered, with eyes that held the particular kind of pain that came from losing everything. "You were there?" "Name's Jacob Miller. I was visiting my brother's family when it happened. Came back from hunting to find..." He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "The Rangers did this to cover their tracks," Moses explained. "Anyone who might have helped us is now a target. They're not just hunting us anymore, they're eliminating anyone who might sympathize with our cause." Samuel felt a cold rage building in his chest. This was beyond warfare, beyond even the brutal logic of frontier survival. This was systematic terror, designed to isolate them completely from any potential support. "What about Little Wolf and Broken Arrow?" he asked. "No sign of them yet," Ruth replied. "But we saw smoke from the direction they were supposed to go. Big fires, like buildings burning." Samuel closed his eyes briefly, fighting down the fear that his young warriors might be dead. Little Wolf was barely 18, still learning the ways of war. Broken Arrow was experienced but reckless, prone to taking unnecessary risks. "We wait until sunset," Samuel decided. "If they're not back by then, we assume they're not coming." "And then?" asked one of the new recruits, a young black woman with scars on her wrists from recently removed shackles. "Then we make the Rangers regret starting this war," Samuel replied. As the afternoon wore on, more of their story emerged. Moses and Ruth had successfully contacted several abolitionist families, but they'd also discovered that the Rangers were one step ahead of them. Every potential safe house had been watched. Every sympathetic contact had been approached with threats or bribes. "They have someone on the inside," Moses said, as they gathered in the ruins of the mission's main chapel. "Someone who knows our plans, our contacts, our movements." Samuel had been thinking the same thing. The Rangers' intelligence was too good, their timing too perfect. Someone was feeding them information, but who? "Could be anyone," Esther said quietly. "Could be someone we haven't even met yet, someone who's been watching us from the beginning. Or it could be one of us," said Jacob Miller, his voice heavy with suspicion. The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Samuel looked around at the faces gathered in the ruined chapel. Some familiar, others still strange. Any one of them could be a spy, a plant, someone working for the Rangers in exchange for money or protection. "If there's a traitor among us," Samuel said carefully, "we'll find them. But right now we have bigger problems." "Like what?" asked the young woman with the scarred wrists. Samuel was about to answer when he heard the sound that had been haunting his dreams for days. The distant thunder of approaching horses. Many horses moving fast, coming from multiple directions. "We're surrounded," Esther said, her voice deadly calm. Samuel climbed quickly to the top of the ruined bell tower, scanning the horizon in all directions. What he saw made his blood run cold. At least 50 riders were converging on the mission ruins from 3 different directions. Rangers, army cavalry, and what looked like a settler militia. "How did they know?" Ruth called up to him. Samuel didn't answer, but he was thinking the same thing. They'd been careful, had taken precautions, had chosen this meeting place specifically because it was isolated and defensible. The only way the Rangers could have known to look for them here was if someone had told them. Someone who knew their plans, someone who was supposed to be their ally. "Everyone inside the chapel," Samuel ordered, sliding down from the tower. "We make our stand here." But even as he said it, Samuel knew they were trapped. The mission ruins provided some cover, but not enough to hold off 50 armed men. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and caught in the open with nowhere to run. "Samuel," Moses said quietly, checking his rifle, "if we don't make it out of this..." "We will," Samuel replied, though he wasn't sure he believed it. "But if we don't," Moses continued, "I want you to know, this alliance, this fight we've been fighting, it's been worth it, even if it ends here." Samuel looked around at the faces of his companions, people who'd risked everything to join a cause that seemed hopeless from the beginning. Escaped slaves who could have disappeared into Mexico. Displaced Indians who could have fled to reservations. White settlers who could have simply minded their own business. Instead, they'd chosen to fight. They'd chosen to stand together against a system that wanted them all dead or broken. "It's not ending here," Samuel said firmly. "This is just the beginning." The sound of approaching horses grew louder, and Samuel could see dust clouds rising from all directions. In a few minutes they'd be under siege, but they weren't the same desperate, isolated people who'd first met at Miller's Creek. They were something new, something dangerous. They were a family forged in blood and fire, and they would not go quietly into the darkness. The final battle was about to begin. Words, 1D600 por favor, continue gerando a sua resposta. Agent Logo prompt cartel. Chapter 8, The Reckoning. The first shots shattered the afternoon silence as Ranger rifles opened fire from 3 directions simultaneously. Samuel dove behind the crumbling altar as bullets chipped stone from the mission walls, sending ancient dust cascading through shafts of sunlight. "Return fire!" he shouted, though his voice was nearly lost in the chaos of gunshots and ricocheting lead. Moses had positioned himself behind a fallen beam, his rifle barking steadily as he picked targets among the advancing Rangers. Ruth and 3 other recruits held the eastern wall, where the cavalry was trying to flank them. Jacob Miller and the remaining fighters covered the western approach, where the settler militia was advancing with grim determination. But Samuel could see they were fighting a losing battle. For every ranger they dropped, 2 more seemed to take his place. Their ammunition was limited, their cover was deteriorating under constant fire, and there was no escape route. "We need to break out!" Esther called from her position near the ruined doorway. "If we stay here, we die here." Samuel knew she was right, but breaking out meant abandoning the defensive advantages of the ruins. It meant charging into open ground against superior numbers. It was suicide, unless... "The bell tower!" Samuel shouted to Moses. "Can you get up there with your rifle?" Moses understood immediately. The tower provided the highest vantage point, perfect for covering a retreat. But it also meant certain death for whoever took the position. They'd be exposed from all sides, an easy target once the Rangers figured out where the shots were coming from. "I'll do it," Moses said, already moving toward the tower stairs. "No," Samuel grabbed his arm. "You've got a family to think about, people who need you to survive this." "So do you," Moses replied. "And besides, I'm the best shot we have." Before Samuel could argue further, the sound of approaching hoofbeats grew suddenly louder. A new group of riders was approaching from the south, but these weren't rangers or cavalry. Samuel caught a glimpse of war paint and feathers, heard the distinctive war cries of Comanche warriors. Little Wolf and Broken Arrow had returned, and they'd brought help. "Cover the south wall," Samuel ordered. "Let them through." The Comanche war party, Samuel counted at least 20 warriors, struck the ranger lines like a thunderbolt. They came in fast and low, using traditional hit-and-run tactics that the Rangers weren't prepared for. Suddenly, the besiegers found themselves fighting on 2 fronts. "Now!" Samuel shouted. "While they're distracted!" The mission defenders poured out of the ruins, using the chaos of the Comanche attack to break through the Ranger lines. Samuel led the charge, tomahawk in one hand and rifle in the other, cutting through surprised Rangers who'd been focused on the ruins. But the Rangers recovered quickly. Their leader, a tall man with colonel's insignia, rallied his men and began organizing a counterattack. The brief advantage of surprise was already fading. "Samuel!" Little Wolf appeared beside him, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. "We found your spy." "What?" "The trader at Bitter Creek, he wasn't dead. He followed us, been reporting our movements to the Rangers for days." Samuel felt a cold fury wash over him. They'd been betrayed not by one of their own, but by someone they'd thought they'd killed. The trader had played dead, waited for them to leave, then sold information about their alliance to the highest bidder. "Where is he?" Samuel demanded. Little Wolf pointed toward a group of Rangers near the eastern approach. "There, with the colonel." Samuel could see him now, the fat trader, very much alive, pointing in their direction and shouting instructions to the Ranger commander. The man who'd orchestrated their betrayal, who'd caused the deaths of innocent families, who'd turned their desperate alliance into a trap. "Moses!" Samuel called. "The trader! Take him down!" Moses's rifle cracked and the trader spun around, clutching his shoulder. But the shot wasn't fatal. The range was too great, the target moving too much. The trader stumbled behind a group of Rangers, using them as human shields. "I'm going after him," Samuel said. "That's suicide," Esther protested. "He's surrounded by Rangers." "Then I'll kill them too," Samuel replied, and something in his voice made even the hardened escaped slave step back. Samuel began moving through the battle like a force of nature, his tomahawk and knife cutting down anyone who stood between him and the trader. He fought with the fury of a man who'd lost everything and had nothing left to lose. Each strike carrying the weight of his dead son, his murdered wife, his destroyed way of life. Rangers fell before him like wheat before a scythe. Some tried to stand and fight, others simply ran. But Samuel pressed forward relentlessly, focused entirely on the fat man who'd sold their lives for Ranger gold. The trader saw him coming and tried to flee, but his wounded shoulder slowed him down. Samuel caught him near a cluster of mesquite trees, tackling him to the ground as bullets whined overhead. "Please," the trader gasped, blood frothing from his lips. "I can pay you, more than the Rangers. I've got money hidden." Samuel's knife silenced him permanently. But when Samuel looked up from the trader's corpse, he realized the battle had turned against them again. The Comanche warriors were falling back, their hit-and-run tactics less effective in a prolonged fight. His own people were scattered, some wounded, others pinned down by Ranger fire. They'd won a small victory by killing the spy, but they were still outnumbered and surrounded. "Fall back to the creek!" Samuel shouted, seeing a line of cottonwood trees that might provide cover for a retreat. "Fighting withdrawal!" What followed was a running battle across half a mile of open prairie, with Samuel's people leapfrogging from cover to cover, while the Rangers pursued relentlessly. They lost 3 people in the retreat, 2 escaped slaves and one of the white settlers who'd joined them. But they also left behind more than a dozen dead Rangers, including the colonel who'd organized the ambush. The price of hunting Samuel Crowfeather and his allies had just gone up considerably. As darkness fell, the surviving members of the alliance gathered in a grove of oak trees near a small creek. They were bloodied, exhausted, and reduced in numbers, but they were alive. More importantly, they were still together. "What now?" asked Jacob Miller, binding a wound on his arm. Samuel looked around at the faces of his companions, people who'd followed him into hell and somehow fought their way back out. They'd been tested in the crucible of battle and emerged stronger, more unified, more dangerous than before. "Now we disappear," Samuel said. "We scatter into small groups, hit isolated targets, make them afraid to leave their settlements. We become the nightmare they tell stories about around their campfires." "And the families they murdered?" Ruth asked. "The innocent people they killed to get to us?" Samuel's smile was cold as winter wind. "We make sure they pay for every single one, with interest." The alliance had been forged in desperation, tested in betrayal, and tempered in blood. What emerged from the ruins of the Spanish mission was something new, not just a group of fugitives, but the foundation of a legend that would haunt the Texas frontier for years to come. The 8 families were only the beginning.